Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Midnight Tales. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Perhaps the world felt too heavy today. Or maybe you're the kind of person who drifts off best while listening to ancient mysteries and forgotten truths. Either way, you've arrived at the right place. There's nothing you need to do now but rest. Let your shoulders soften, your breathing slow, and your thoughts become as light as mist rising from a quiet lake. Because tonight, we're journeying back to a time before time was counted, to the age before the flood, when the earth was young and strange beings walked among humanity. We're exploring the mystery of the Nephilim, the enigmatic giants born from the union of divine and mortal, the fallen ones whose story has echoed through millennia in whispers, warnings, and wonder. Before we begin, if these gentle explorations into the ancient world help you unwind or give you a peaceful way to close your day, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. And when you wake tomorrow, leave a comment with the name of your city. It's always wonderful to know where in the world you're listening from, as we all drift together through these timeless stories. Now, settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin. The name that means fallen. The word Nephilim comes from ancient Hebrew, and scholars have long debated its precise meaning. Some say it derives from the root naphal, which means to fall. In this sense, the Nephilim are the fallen ones, beings who descended from a higher realm into the world of flesh and time. Others translate it as those who cause others to fall, suggesting not just their origin, but their influence, their power to lead humanity astray, to topple kingdoms, to break the natural order. Still others believe the name means the giants, emphasizing their immense physical stature. But whatever the translation, the name itself carries weight. It feels heavy on the tongue, like something that should be spoken carefully, quietly, in the dim light of evening when shadows grow long and the boundary between myth and memory becomes thin. The Nephilim appear only briefly in the canonical texts. In the Book of Genesis, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, we find a strange and haunting passage. It tells us that when humanity began to multiply upon the earth, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. From these unions, the Nephilim were born. The text describes them as mighty men of old, men of renown, giants who walked the earth in those days. And then, just as quickly as they're introduced, they fade from the narrative, swept away, it seems, by the great flood that would cleanse the world. But this brief mention in Genesis is only the beginning. In the apocryphal texts, particularly the Book of Enoch, the story expands, deepens, becomes richer and stranger. There, the Nephilim are not merely mentioned in passing. They are central figures in a cosmic drama, children of rebellion, bearers of forbidden knowledge, agents of chaos who change the course of human history, the sons of God and the daughters of men. To understand the Nephilim, we must first understand their fathers. The sons of God are described in the Book of Enoch as the Watchers, a class of angels tasked with observing humanity from a distance. These were beings of light and knowledge, celestial guardians who dwelt in the heavens and watched over the unfolding story of mankind. But 200 of these watchers, led by an angel named Semyaza, made a fateful decision. They looked upon the beauty of human women and desired them. They descended from the heavens, from their posts in the stars, and crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. This descent was not a simple fall. It was a deliberate act a choice made in full awareness of its consequences. The Watchers swore an oath to one another on Mount Hermon, binding themselves together in their rebellion. They knew they were breaking divine law, violating the separation between the celestial and the earthly. But desire, curiosity, perhaps even love, drove them onward. And so they came down, clothed themselves in flesh, and took human wives. From these unions, the Nephilim were born, and they were like nothing the earth had ever seen, giants among men. The Nephilim were enormous. Ancient texts describe them as towering over ordinary humans, some standing as tall as 300 cubits, nearly 500 feet, though such measurements are likely symbolic rather than literal. Even if we take the numbers as exaggerations meant to convey their monstrous nature, the accounts are consistent. These beings were giants in every sense. They were physically immense, stronger than any human, capable of feats that seemed impossible. But their size was not their only defining trait. The Nephilim possessed a hunger that could not be satisfied. According to the Book of Enoch, they consumed vast quantities of food, devouring the produce of the earth until there was nothing left for humanity. When the harvests ran out, they turned to animals, and when the animals were gone, some accounts say they turned upon one another and even upon mankind itself. They became a plague upon the world, a force of destruction that grew more violent with each passing generation. They were not merely large, they were excessive in every way. Their appetites, their violence, their pride, all of it was magnified beyond the human scale. They represented a kind of corruption, a distortion of the natural order. Where humanity was meant to live in balance with creation, the Nephilim consumed without restraint. Where humans were meant to honor the divine, the Nephilim exalted themselves, seeing their own strength as proof of their superiority. Bearers of forbidden knowledge. But the Nephilim were not the only legacy of the Watchers' descent. The fallen angels themselves brought something even more dangerous than their giant offspring, knowledge that was never meant for human hands. The Book of Enoch names the Watchers and lists what each one taught to humanity. Azazel, one of the chief among them, taught men to forge weapons of war, swords and knives, shields and breastplates, instruments of violence and conquest. He also taught women the art of adornment, cosmetics, and jewelry, the ways to beautify the body and attract desire. Another Watcher, named Shemihaza, taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, the early forms of sorcery and herbalism. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the signs of the stars and constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Each of these teachings in isolation might seem like gifts. The knowledge of metals could lead to tools for farming. The knowledge of stars could guide navigation. The knowledge of plants could bring healing. But the texts present these as corruptions, secrets that were not yet meant to be revealed, given too soon to a humanity that was not ready. The knowledge of weapons brought war. The knowledge of sorcery brought manipulation and deceit. The knowledge of the heavens, when used for divination and astrology, led people away from trust in the divine and toward attempts to control fate. The Watchers, in teaching these things, were not enlightening humanity. They were burdening it. They were accelerating a process that should have unfolded slowly, naturally, across generations, and in doing so, they set the stage for violence, pride, and rebellion that would spread across the earth like a sickness A world undone. The world before the flood, according to these ancient texts, was a place of chaos and corruption. The Nephilim ruled as tyrants, mighty and feared, while humanity suffered beneath them. Violence filled the earth. Enoch writes that the earth was filled with blood and iniquity, that justice had been abandoned, that mercy was forgotten. The divine order, the harmony that was meant to exist between heaven and earth, between spirit and flesh, had been shattered. And God, looking upon this broken world, grieved. The book of Genesis says that the Lord saw how great the wickedness of humanity had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. It says that the Lord regretted making mankind and was grieved to his heart. This is one of the most haunting lines in all of Scripture. The image of the divine filled with sorrow, looking upon a creation that had gone so terribly wrong. And so a decision was made. The world would be cleansed. A great flood would come, washing away the Nephilim, the Watcher's influence, and the corrupted generations of humanity. Only a remnant would be saved, a single family found righteous in the eyes of God, Noah and his kin, preserved in an ark to begin the world again. The flood and the fate of the Nephilim. When the waters came, they covered the earth. Mountains were submerged. Valleys disappeared beneath the rising tide, and the Nephilim, for all their strength and size, could not escape. The flood took them, one by one, until none remained upon the land. But their story does not end with the flood. According to the Book of Enoch, when the Nephilim died, their bodies perished, but their spirits did not. Because they were hybrids, beings born of both celestial and earthly origins, they did not have a place in either realm. Their spirits, it is said, became restless, wandering the earth as demons, invisible but present, seeking to influence, to corrupt, to continue the work their fathers had begun. This idea, that the Nephilim became the origin of demonic forces, appears in various Jewish traditions and early Christian writings. It offers an explanation for the presence of evil in the world, a narrative thread that connects the rebellion of angels to the suffering and temptation experienced by humanity. The Nephilim, in this view, never truly left. They simply changed form. And yet, some traditions suggest that not all the Nephilim were destroyed. In the Book of Numbers, when the Israelites send spies into the land of Canaan, the scouts return with a troubling report. They say they saw giants in the land, descendants of Anak, and that they seemed like Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, they said, and we looked the same to them. This passage has puzzled interpreters for centuries. If the Nephilim were wiped out in the flood, how could they appear again? Some believe the scouts were simply using hyperbole, describing very tall people and comparing them to the legendary giants of old. Others suggest that the bloodline of the Nephilim survived in some way, perhaps through Noah's family, perhaps through another line that was not recorded. Still, others believe that the Watchers descended again after the flood, repeating their ancient transgression. Whatever the explanation, the persistence of giant figures in biblical and extra-biblical narratives, Goliath, Og king of Bashan, the Anakim, suggests that the shadow of the Nephilim lingered long after the flood waters receded. Echoes in other cultures. The story of the Nephilim is not unique to Hebrew scripture. Around the world, in cultures separated by oceans and centuries, we find similar tales of giants, of divine beings who mated with humans, of a time when the boundaries between heaven and earth were blurred. In Greek mythology, the Titans were enormous beings, children of the primordial gods, who ruled the cosmos before being overthrown by the Olympians. The Gigantes, another race of giants, rose up to challenge the gods and were struck down in a great battle. These stories, like the tale of the Nephilim, speak of rebellion, of beings who challenged the divine order and were punished for it. In Hindu tradition, the Daityas and Danavas are races of powerful beings, often depicted as giants who are in constant conflict with the gods. In Norse mythology, the Jotnar, or frost giants, are ancient beings who predate the gods and represent chaos and destruction. In Mesopotamian legend, the Apkallu are semi-divine sages who brought knowledge to humanity. Sometimes depicted as giant fishmen or birdmen, beings who cross the boundary between the divine and mortal realms. These parallels are striking. They suggest either a common memory, a shared mythic language that spans cultures, or perhaps, as some have speculated, a common historical event, a time when something extraordinary happened, something so significant that it left an imprint on the collective consciousness of humanity. The Book of Enoch and the expanded narrative. The Book of Enoch, though not included in the canonical Bible, was highly regarded in ancient times. Fragments of it have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it is quoted in the New Testament in the Epistle of Jude. In Ethiopian Christianity, it remains part of the scriptural canon to this day. This text provides the most detailed account of the Watchers and the Nephilim, expanding the brief Genesis narrative into a rich, complex story. Enoch himself, according to the text, was a prophet and scribe who was taken up by God and shown visions of heaven and earth, past and future. He witnessed the fall of the Watchers, the birth of the Nephilim, and the coming judgment. He was commanded to deliver a message to the fallen angels, informing them that their petition for mercy had been denied, that they would be bound and punished, and that their children, the Nephilim, would destroy one another and be wiped from the earth. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers' punishment in vivid detail. They are bound in chains and cast into dark pits beneath the earth, where they await the final judgment. Some traditions place this prison in the depths of Tartarus, the Greek underworld, while others identify it with Sheol, or the abyss. The Watchers, once glorious beings of light, are now trapped in darkness, tormented by the knowledge of their own downfall. But Enoch's book also speaks of hope. It prophesies a time when the earth will be renewed, when wickedness will be purged, and when a new age of righteousness will dawn. The flood in this narrative is not merely an act of destruction. It is a cleansing, a necessary reset that allows creation to begin again, this time free from the corruption of the Nephilim. The psychological and symbolic meaning, beyond the literal reading of these texts, the story of the Nephilim carries deep symbolic resonance. It speaks to the human experience of temptation, of crossing boundaries that should not be crossed, of the consequences of pride and excess. The Watchers represent the desire to know what should remain hidden, to possess what does not belong to us. The Nephilim represent the monstrous results of such desire, the distortions and destructions that follow when we violate the natural order. In psychological terms, the Nephilim can be seen as symbols of the shadow self, the parts of us that are too large, too hungry, too violent, the aspects of the psyche that, when left unchecked, consume everything around them. The story warns us of what happens when these shadow elements take control, when pride becomes tyranny, when knowledge becomes manipulation, when strength becomes brutality. The flood, then, is not just a historical or mythical event. It is an archetype of transformation. the necessary destruction that precedes renewal. It is the cleansing of the psyche, the washing away of old patterns, the death of the false self, so that something truer, something lighter, can emerge. Modern interpretations and theories. In modern times, the story of the Nephilim has captured the imagination of many. Some see it as evidence of ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors who came to Earth in prehistory and were remembered in myth as gods or angels. In this interpretation, the sons of God were advanced beings from another world, and the Nephilim were hybrids, the result of genetic experimentation or interbreeding. Others view the Nephilim through the lens of lost civilizations, suggesting that they represent a forgotten race of advanced humans or a pre-flood civilization that was destroyed and whose memory survived only in fragmented myths. Proponents of this view point to megalithic structures around the world, massive stone monuments that seem to require knowledge and technology beyond what we attribute to ancient peoples, and suggest that the builders may have been influenced by or descended from these ancient giants. Still others approach the story theologically, seeing the Nephilim as a warning against the dangers of spiritual pride and rebellion, a reminder that even the most exalted beings can fall, and that the consequences of such a fall extend far beyond the individual, affecting entire worlds. And there are those who read the story as myth in the truest sense, not as literal history, but as sacred narrative, a story that conveys deep truths about the human condition, about the relationship between the divine and the mortal, about the fragility of order and the ever-present possibility of chaos. Archaeological curiosities. Throughout history, there have been claims of discoveries that might support the existence of the Nephilim. Ancient skeletons of unusual size, massive bones unearthed in various parts of the world, have occasionally been interpreted as evidence of giants. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers reported findings of enormous human remains in North America, fueling speculation and wonder. However, most of these claims have been debunked. The bones were often misidentified, belonging to large mammals like mammoths or whales, or they were deliberate hoaxes. Modern archaeology has found no verified evidence of a race of human giants. The largest confirmed ancient humans were not significantly taller than modern populations, and conditions like gigantism, caused by hormonal imbalances, were rare and not indicative of a separate race. But the persistence of these stories, the recurring theme of giants in folklore and legend, suggests something deeper than mere fabrication. Whether the Nephilim were literal giants or symbolic representations of powerful, oppressive forces, their presence in the human imagination is undeniable. The Watcher's regret. In the Book of Enoch, there is a moment of profound pathos. The Watchers, bound and awaiting judgment, send a message to Enoch, asking him to intercede on their behalf. They acknowledge their guilt, their transgression, but they plead for mercy. Enoch, moved by their request, takes their petition to the throne of God. But the answer that comes back is final. There will be no reprieve. The Watchers made their choice, and now they must live with the consequences. Their children, the Nephilim, will be destroyed, and they themselves will remain in bondage until the end of days. This moment captures something essential about the nature of free will and accountability. The Watchers were not tricked or deceived. They acted knowingly, and their punishment, harsh as it seems, is the natural result of their actions. It speaks to the idea that some boundaries exist for a reason, and that crossing them, even with good intentions, even out of love or curiosity, carries a cost. The legacy of the Nephilim today thousands of years after these stories were first told. The Nephilim continue to fascinate. They appear in literature, film, art, and theology. They are the subject of scholarly debate, spiritual reflection, and popular speculation. They represent a mystery that refuses to be fully solved, a story that resists simple interpretation. For some, the Nephilim are a reminder of humanity's ancient past, a time when the world was stranger and more dangerous, when the line between myth and history was not yet clearly drawn. For others, they are symbols of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the divine and the profane, between the heights of potential and the depths of corruption. And for still others, they are simply a story, a tale told in the firelight, passed down through generations, meant to entertain, to warn, to inspire wonder. But even as stories, they carry weight. They remind us that we are part of a long, continuous narrative, that the questions we ask today about power, about knowledge, about the limits of humanity, are questions that have been asked for millennia. The silence after the flood. After the flood, the world began again. Noah and his family stepped out onto dry land, into a world cleansed and quiet. The violence was gone. The Nephilim were gone. The earth for a time was still, but the memory remained. In the stories told by firelight, in the warnings given to children, in the scriptures written and preserved, the Nephilim lived on, not as physical beings, but as echoes, as shadows, as reminders of what once was and what could be again if humanity forgets, if boundaries are crossed, if pride overcomes wisdom. In the stillness after the storm, there is always a choice: to remember or to forget, to honor the boundaries or to test them, to walk humbly or to grasp for power. The story of the Nephilim, in the end, is not just about giants, it is about us, resting in the mystery. And now, as the story draws to a close, let yourself rest in the mystery. You don't need to solve it. You don't need to decide whether the Nephilim were real or symbolic, historical or mythical. You can simply hold the story gently, let it settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, and allow it to be what it is: a thread in the vast tapestry of human memory, a whisper from the ancient world, a reminder that we are part of something much older and larger than ourselves. The night is quiet now. The world outside continues, stars turning overhead, the earth spinning slowly through space, and somewhere, in the deep archives of history and myth, the Nephilim sleep, not as monsters, not as gods, but as shadows in the collective dream of humanity. Let your breathing slow. Let your body grow heavy and warm. And as you drift towards sleep, know that you are safe, that the flood has passed, that the giants are gone, and that the world, for all its mysteries, is still here, still turning, still holding you. If you enjoyed this gentle journey into the ancient past, please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. And tomorrow, when you wake, leave a comment with the name of your city. It's always wonderful to know where in the world you're resting tonight. Sleep well, dream softly, and good night.